In today's video, we're discussing the future of Nazem Kadri. Is he indeed going to the Islanders? And if he is, who should the Avalanche look at as potential Kadri replacements? And should the Islanders consider trading Matthew Barzal and maybe making him the person who goes out to make the room for Kadri and other pieces to make this team better? We'll discuss an article, and if that's even reasonable, coming up next. Welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of things to talk about today. Before we do get into the rumor section of the video, I do want to take a look at a couple of signings, or one signing and one near signing, I guess we'll say. The Winnipeg Jets have avoided salary arbitration and come to terms with restricted free agent forward Mason Appleton. Of course, he gets a 3-year contract valued at $2.166 million per season. Of course, Appleton was a Winnipeg draft pick, worked his way up in the organization, went to Seattle in the expansion draft, and then was reacquired near the NHL deadline, and now inks a 3-year contract extension. Hopefully he's able to get a more prominent role and kind of secure himself likely on that third line in Winnipeg. I think it's a pretty fair deal. I know the year before he went to Seattle, he certainly had a bit of a breakout season, which explains why they were interested in him. But last year, I think it was fair to say that it wasn't quite as good to him. But certainly not his fault. On a new team with a bunch of players that never played together before. Certainly, you got to expect some bumps in the road. But I would think that now that he's back in Winnipeg and for familiar territory, he should be able to carry on and hopefully get himself on track here and certainly earn, if not exceed, this contract. There is word as well that the Carolina Hurricanes and RFA forward Marty Necas are close to a contract being completed and terms almost being agreed upon. Sounds like Don Waddell's not too concerned about it. He said that talks are ongoing, that he and the agent for Necas basically speak pretty much every day and are trying to get this hammered out, and it should be done soon. They didn't seem to really have any concerns over whether or not it was going to get done or drag into training camp or anything of that nature. Of course, Necas doesn't have arbitration rights, so certainly those types of contracts for RFAs that don't have arb rights, sometimes they can drag on because there's no real deadline or rush per se until you get closer to camp. Then the pressure gets on. Player doesn't want to miss. The team wants them there, and then you got to figure it out quickly sometimes. And sometimes they drag on, sometimes they don't. But the Necas deal looks like it shouldn't be too far away. He put up 14 goals and 26 assists last year, but he did have a difficult time in the playoffs where he wasn't really producing, and it was certainly if his production would have been better, might have been the difference for Carolina being able to have a little bit more success. Hard to say. But of course, losing Vincent Trocheck in free agency, who goes to division rival the New York Rangers, I could certainly see a scenario unfold where Necas can get a bigger role. I would expect that there's probably going to be a training camp competition between Necas and Jesperi Kotkaniemi for that number 2 center spot, formerly occupied by Trocheck, of course. So, those... you get Jordan Staal in that number 3 spot, so you kind of having a battle for those two for number 2, and of course the other one may end up having to play on the wing rather than play on the 4th line. So we'll see where things go, but near done deal for Necas. Hopefully we can find out about that soon. Now the big question here today, of course, is what is going on with Nazem Kadri? Is he for sure going to the Islanders or not? And I've seen different articles saying, should the Avalanche really make a push to bring him back? Well, I'm not entirely convinced that he's even available. I know that there's some uncertainty and, it's not confirmed publicly where he's heading. But I've seen and heard enough that at this point, I think I'd be pretty shocked if we didn't find out that he does have a deal with the New York Islanders. And what we talked about a number of times before was that Lou Lamoriello is working on other trades, trying to jiggle the salary cap around here so that he can get the necessary space to get him done. And official, it's the same with Noah Dobson here as well. Of course, the young defenseman had a breakout season, is certainly a pivotal part of the team's future. There's no doubt. What do the Avalanche do from here? Well, an athletic article by Peter Baugh makes some suggestions, and I do think that some of the things that he suggested here do make sense, because I really don't see Kadri coming back. As you can see in Colorado, they tend not to have a history of really overpaying players. If you look at the pecking order there, like you get Cale Makar at the top right now. That's going to possibly soon be Nate McKinnon. Is McKinnon going to get more money than Makar? is the next question. I'm not sure that he will. I think it's possible that he could request it, and that he could probably justify it in some cases. That Makar contract could very well even look like a bargain, as much as it's a big money deal. But who's going to be the highest paid player? But look at the deals for Rantanen, and you look at Landeskog is another prime example. Rantanen might seem to be a little bit overpaid right now. But based on what he's done in the last few years, you can really justify the numbers speak for themselves. Sakic and the Avalanche tend not to overpay players, and I don't see them making Kadri a $9 million player. As much as they liked what he brings and they really enjoyed having him there, and he was a big part of their success of winning a Stanley Cup, I don't see them wanting to sign Kadri to the same kind of deal that they're going to have to do for McKinnon on his new extension, on Makar and Rantanen, or even Landeskog for that matter. He'd probably have to be the fifth or sixth highest paid player. It just doesn't make sense, and I don't see Kadri settling for that kind of money. So we'll have to see where things go. But in the event that the rumor of him going to the Islanders doesn't need to work out to be true, a couple of options here for the Avalanche. One would be Evan Rodrigues. I'm surprised this guy's not signed either. He plays center, which makes him a little bit more important in some cases. Centers do tend to get paid more, and certainly teams tend to focus on that position a little bit more than the wings. The wingers tend to be a little bit easier time to be replaced, you could say. Not everybody can play the middle of the ice, and Evan Rodrigues certainly had a bit of a breakout year in Pittsburgh last year. I think it's fair to say, with all the moves that the Penguins have made, I'm not really sure that they have any option to really bring him back. I mean, they've been able to bring back Letang and Malkin. They re-signed Brian Rust. They kept Raquel after the deadline. Heinen's back. I don't know that there's really any room or money or anything like that there, unless barring another trade, of course, which you never know. Is Pittsburgh trying to make a deal with Rodrigues, and they're doing the same thing as the Islanders, and they're trying to clear money? I'm not sure. We don't have any reason to suspect that at this point, but I think Rodrigues could be a pretty good of a bargain deal for somebody to play in that middle six role and center for the Avalanche to replace Kadri. Different kind of player. He's not going to give you all the same intangibles, but he could be somebody who maybe not give you the same production, but he could still be a decent player, and given a bigger role, surrounded by that kind of talent, could break out even more. It's possible. Maybe they turn to maybe bolster their wing a little bit, maybe go with a guy like Sonny Milano, who's also an interesting offensive player without a contract. I think Rodrigues makes more sense because they could use a center. Milano's obviously very talented. Maybe they figure out another player on the roster to play center. Maybe that's Landeskog or Rantanen. Maybe they try them at center a little bit more regularly. I know they move players around due to injury in the playoffs, and everything they tried seemed to work well. Maybe they bring back Paul Stastny, he's a veteran guy who's still able to be productive too. Obviously has ties to the area from being with the team before. So, hard to say what happens, but they do have some interesting UFA options that they can go to without giving up any assets. That much is for sure. Now, again, tying this back to the Kadri, to the Islanders, is it true? Is it happening? Of course, we know that the Islanders are likely almost guaranteed working on shedding salary. We know that's pretty much a given here for Lou. But there's been an article, and we touched on this back, I think, about 4 or 5 days ago. But it's kind of been brought up here yet again. Another article here from New York Islanders Hockey Now, Stefan Rosner, so talking about his idea here is that they need to make a decision on Matthew Barzal. This is kind of connected to the other article from that we talked about before, not really article, but the other conversation, I should say. But Rosner says that he feels the Islanders in the very near future need to make a decision that either they extend Barzal, make him the cornerstone of this team, or do they consider moving him? They have to make a decision. Barzal's said all the right things, like all the players tend to do, that he wants to be there, he wants to win there, all those things. And of course, Islander fans are probably a little leery because they heard this before from John Tavares, of course, who left town. And you can say what you want. Some fans are convinced he was always leaving. Some feel that he had every intention of coming back, and then once the Leafs made that offer, he just couldn't resist going home. We'll probably never know. Maybe someday Tavares will talk a little bit more open and honestly about it. I don't know. All we do know is that he said all the right things and he left. And then you saw Johnny Gaudreau in Calgary say all the right things and he left. Players are in awkward spots, and they're not going to come out while they're under contract and be like, yeah, I'm probably going to leave. I don't really want to stay here. That's never going to happen. If they do, that would make waves in the media. That's just not going to be something that you see. This is that simple. So at the end of the day here, do they need to commit to Barzal or trade him? Probably, but I do think that there's really no reason to think that they wouldn't lock him up and make him the cornerstone of that team. for the foreseeable future right now. I mean, he might not live up to a $10 million contract, which is ultimately his qualifying offer that's due after this next contract expires, and that might be the problem that they run into. Of course, they're going to have real good serious dialogue with he and his agent about a long-term deal that might be less than $10 million. They did that last deal hoping he would become that, but at the same time, you can make the argument that he's not a more offensive, productive player because of the team and the fact that the team has not really provided him with quality enough wingers who he can play with. And there's certainly an argument to be made in that regard as well. But the other thing that he references here in this article was comments by one of his Hockey Now colleagues, Jimmy Murphy. And this is the part we had talked about briefly before. We're talking about some potential big Islanders trades coming up here in the rest of the summer, back 4 or 5 days ago, where Jimmy Murphy did write an article about it. He was just talking about it on Twitter, referencing the fact that he thinks that the Islanders should consider trading Barzal instead of locking him up long term and getting a bunch of assets back. And maybe Detroit would be a prime candidate for a trade. Maybe Yzerman would want to accelerate their rebuild and bring in a guy like Barzal. And he could make him a big piece there since they're ready to take some steps forward. They brought in a lot of other players this offseason. And maybe the Red Wings could offer up a good package that would also help the Islanders. Although those trades are really hard to win, as we've talked about here before, reviewing some older trades that have happened. It's not easy, and teams quite often lose the trade when they're the ones sending the best player out of town. I don't think that trading Barzal would get a good reaction from the fan base for starters. I don't think that there's any reason why that they really need to go down that road right now. To me, they need to keep Barzal, and they need to find a way to move on from some of the older vets that are not producing and bring in some more talented younger players that are more suiting and fitting to play with Barzal. That's what I would do. Now, that's easier said than done. The other thing, though, is Detroit willing to pony up a massive return? You're talking about an extremely dynamic offensive centerman and, still in his early 20s. Are they going to give up top prospect defenseman Simon Evanson? Are they going to give you, at least one, if not two, good roster players? Like maybe I doubt they'd want to offer up Larkin. That wouldn't make sense. But would they want to move like a Bertuzzi? I'm not even sure Bertuzzi would be a good fit. And that's also referenced in the article because of Bertuzzi's stance on the vaccination, where he didn't want to be vaccinated. That would be a sticking point for Lou. A lot of fans may not care, but Lou would, and that's a problem for him. So I don't see him trading for Bertuzzi, even though he would be a good fit in some respects. Who else are you looking at there on the Red Wings? If it's not Larkin, if it's not Bertuzzi, they're not moving Raymond, they're not moving Sider. That's going to be what it takes, though. You're looking at Evanson, probably at least one prominent player off the roster, and I'm not even sure who that's going to be at this point. They just signed Andrew Kopp. I don't see them moving him. He might be a good fit, but that's not likely going to happen. It's, again, what are you going to do, right? I don't see Detroit wanting to move the necessary pieces that it's going to take to have a chance at Barzal. You're looking at multiple picks, at least one first rounder, maybe a second rounder, Simon Evanson, and then you're probably looking at, like I said, at least one roster player coming back, and that's maybe Verana might be the roster player. That might be a decent player. He's still, young enough and the potential 20, really a 30-plus goal scorer. Like the way he scored the last couple of years, he's at a 40-goal pace. He's just been injured a lot. And 40-goal pace is what I mean during his tenure with Detroit. If you just look at the number of goals he scored, number of games, put that over a season, it is a 40-goal pace. But the problem is staying healthy to actually have a 40-goal season. Can he do that? He might be a good piece, but still, Verana, Evanson, a first, a second, it's going to be a big package. I just don't know if Yzerman's going to want to do that, and I just don't think Lou wants to do that. Is he going to want to really, upset this fan base to that point? I don't think so, but, obviously, like I said, this is not a rumor suggesting that Barzal's going to Detroit. This is just one hockey writer's opinion on something that they thought they should do, and an Islander writer kind of responding, suggesting that maybe they look at it. But again, he made a lot of the same points I just made in the article too, talking about whether or not they keep Barzal or not, and whether Detroit's a good match. That, it's questionable what the return is and would Detroit want to pay that. And I'm not entirely convinced that they would want to, but the only way you're going to even get Lou's ears to perk up to make it considerable is to make it a massive package. And I just don't know that Detroit and Yzerman are going to want to do that. So what moves do you see the Islanders making? Do you think Kadri is an Islander? Is there any chance at all you'd consider trading Barzal to make the money work for Kadri, Thompson, and maybe bringing in another player? The argument here, too, is that maybe by trading Barzal, you might get enough assets back and savings at the cap that maybe you'd have an easier time flipping some of that to go to Vancouver for JT Miller. And then maybe you bring in Miller and Kadri, but then you lose Barzal. And are you a better team? You might be, but you're only going to be a better team for a short stint. I mean, I guess the downfall here is that Barzal's still relatively young, whereas you've got Kadri, who's like 32, and Miller's like going on 30. So you have a couple of really good players, but how long are they going to be at that level of play? It's debatable. So I don't know. It'd be awfully risky, and I just don't see it happening. But I thought the articles were interesting and wanted to address it here to see what everybody else thinks as well. So let me know what your thoughts are on the Islanders, Kadri, Barzal. How do they handle this? Is Detroit a fit? Could it happen? Let me know down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.